Very well. Good. It is nice to see that the foul weather that is upon us has not deterred all of you from arriving, and I could think of no better weather conditions under which to read of the storm that Juno, with the help of the king of the winds, Aeolus, has inflicted in her rage upon the Trojans. But before we go into that, I will say a few things. First, it seems to me that today, more or less, we will finish our discussion of Vergil and the Aeneid, that is, which will leave us time to discuss Apollonius of Rhodes and his Argonautica. But it's going to be a relatively short discussion of that epic poem. We will devote next week to that. And then our final session, 2 weeks from today, will be devoted to a kind of summing up of what it is that we did in this course. And of course, I will try to guide you as to what to do with our approaching final exam. It so turns out that our final exam is probably the first of exams this semester, because it is on January 10, the semester ending on January 9. And our last encounter is exactly a week before the exam. So I will maybe just to assuage and alleviate maybe doubts or wonderings that you might have about the exam. So I have already thought what it is going to be like, and it is going to consist of 25 questions of 3 different kinds. There are going to be multiple choice questions. There are going to be true-false questions of the kind that presents you with a statement which you should say whether it is true or false. Sometimes you will also have to support your choice by writing something in support of your choice, as I said. So that's type number 2. And the third type is open-ended questions. Now, the open-ended questions do not require you to write anything that even remotely resembles an essay or even a paragraph. I will leave the required space for the answer, which should be 2 lines, maybe 3, if you feel very prolific and think that you have more to add. But 1 or 2 short sentences, you will see the questions themselves. They will not require you to supply too much information. And I can generally describe the exam as one that tests your mastery of what it is that I spoke of in our sessions. I think the best way to prepare for such an exam is just to listen again to all the lectures that are recorded and available, and you can set yourselves a custom of hearing 1 lecture a day, and it's going to be perfect. This is practically it. Of course, as I said in our last session, I will show you examples of the kinds of questions that are going to appear, and you will know fully well what to expect. I believe that the duration of the exam is going to be 2 hours, which is modestly enough for such a task. And that's it. The same, of course, applies to Moed Aleph and Moed Bet, as we say, and I'm sure it's going to be fine. I will try to give respectful representation to all the works that we have discussed. None will be left uncared for. Reason has it that the greater weight will be given to Homer on the one hand, and perhaps to Vergil on the other hand. They more or less wrap the course nicely. And the other works that we've discussed will also appear there. Herodotus, Hesiod, Ovid, of course. And there's going to be also I believe, an equal share amongst the questions themselves of how many questions will be open-ended, how many true, false, and how many multiple choice. Roughly, maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 questions of each, and it's going to be fair enough, I'm sure. But of that, later. So now you know at least what to expect. It's always better to know what lies ahead than to just go blindly into something that you have no idea about. Good. Last time we began our discussion of Vergil, whom we said is considered the greatest of Latin poets that ever were, and of his works, the greatest and best known is the epic poem, the Aeneid, which celebrates many things, primarily the Greek literary heritage on the one hand, and the grandeur of Rome on the other hand, linking the mythological founder of the Roman race, the Trojan Aeneas, with the current princeps, the current ruler of the Roman Empire, the first of the emperors, Augustus, adopted son and great nephew of the divine Julius. And of course, Julius Caesar, who was not, as is perhaps mistakenly and commonly believed, was not the first Caesar or emperor. No, he was perpetual dictator, but not an emperor. So Julius Caesar attributed his descent and origin to none other than the goddess Venus. Why? Because Venus was the divine mother of Aeneas, whose father was the mortal Anchises. And of course, their son, Iulus, is the origin and source of the Julian clan, to which Julius Caesar and his line belonged. And of course, Augustus belongs there as well. So we saw that the purpose of the Aeneid is expressly to adore Augustus and his line, but not openly, rather by foreshadowing the greatness of Rome in the qualities of its legendary founder, Aeneas. And so we began with a description of the Aeneid. The Aeneid, just like the Odyssey, upon which, that is the Homeric tradition, upon which the entire Roman epic of Vergil is based. So the Aeneid is a kind of emulation an imitation and an emulation of the Greek tradition. Famously opening with the line Alma virumque cano, I sing of arms and of the man. That is, we are going to read both the Iliad and the Odyssey in one, as it were, beginning with the first half, the first sixth book, which is the Odyssean part, as it were, and the remaining six, the Iliadic part. So in the Odyssean part, just as in the original Odyssey, we begin, the Latin expression is in medias res, into the midst of affairs. We do not begin with the account of the fall of Troy. No, Troy has already fallen. In fact, when the story begins, Troy was destroyed already 7 years previously. So we begin with the Trojans setting sail from Sicily. I will show you a map of the wanderings of Aeneas. There it is. Much like the wanderings of Odysseus, though, of course, Aeneas's route was completely different. Odysseus only had to get from Troy over here to Ithaca here. It took him 10 years. We know why. Aeneas had a much longer journey and a more dangerous voyage, as it were, since he had to make all the way from Troy to an unknown site in the west, in Hesperia. Now, Hesperia is the land of the west, one of several names by which Italy is known. So we have Italy, of course, we have Hesperia, we also have Ausonia, another name of Italy. So Aeneas sets sail from Troy and has the Odyssean adventures. But when the poem begins, we encounter Aeneas and his fleet of 12 ships here at the western tip of Sicily, and they start sailing towards the Italian peninsula. But then Juno spots them, and we've already said why. Juno harbors special hatred towards the Trojans and in general, and Aeneas in particular. On the one hand, their very existence, their very presence reminds her of the judgment of Paris and how her own beauty was spurned by that Trojan prince. That's one cause. The other is that she favors the newly founded city of Carthage here, where the queen is Dido, whom we will discuss shortly. So, seeing Aeneas and his fleet, she discusses her shame with her own self, and she decides that even if Aeneas is destined to found a new city and start a line of a conquering, all-embracing people, yet she will place obstacles in his way and do her utmost to impede the fulfillment of that fateful decree, that is the founding of the Roman race. At the very beginning, Vergil says, it was such a great labor to establish the Roman race. Tantae molis erat Romanam conderegent. Well, so let's return to the text and continue from there. Infuriated by these things, still more she kept the Trojans far from Latium, tossed everywhere over all the sea. So even though the Trojans lost, many died at the hands of the great Grecian heroes, still Juno remains the implacable foe of the Trojans. She is not willing to let go of her hatred. Not such a great quality in a god or in anyone else, but this is what she feels. So she wants to inflict misery, further misery on the Trojans. What shall she do? What shall she do? Speaking such words, that is her self-deliberation and the decision to harm the Trojans, the goddess with anger flaming in her heart came to Aeolia. So this is another reminiscence of the Odyssey, because we remember Odysseus reaching Aeolia in the 10th book of the Odyssey, where the king of the winds, Aeolus, gives him a gift, the bag full of winds, the storm winds, all trapped in that bag except the western wind that will blow him safely and give him safe conduct to Ithaca. Of course, everything then goes wrong, but we know what Aeolia is. Fatherland of clouds, a place rife with the raging blasts of the wind. Here in a vast cave, King Aeolus commanded the tempestuous winds and the roaring tempests. So everything that comes upon us, even today, is the work of Aeolus, who sets free the raging winds and the bursting of tempests. But of course, when the weather is fine, that is because he bound them in chains and held them imprisoned. Indignant with a huge roar, they boomed through the secret places of the mountain. But Aeolus sits in his lofty stronghold, scepter in hand, and he calms their spirit and moderates their anger. If he did not, in their speed, they would surely bear away with them the seas and the land and the deep sky. They would sweep them through the winds. So again, there is order in nature because there is someone who keeps that order. In this case, it is Aeolus. So the winds are all kept silent and tame in their cave. And so Juno spoke to him with these suppliant words. So Juno, queen of the gods, she cannot do as she wishes because everyone has their own realm of responsibility and the things that they can and are allowed to do. Therefore, she needs the help of Aeolus, and as everything else in such affairs of requests, here too we have this give and take. What does she promise him in return for his assistance? Aeolus, for the father of gods and the king of men, has given you the power to calm the waves and to raise them up with the wind. A people hostile to me sails on the Tyrrhenian Sea. The Tyrrhenian Sea is the sea on the western coast of Italy. And people hostile to me sails on the Tyrrhenian Sea, carrying Ilium and the conquered Penates to Italy. So it is as if Troy, although it is destroyed, is now being born to Italy to be born again. The gods of Troy, the Penates, mind you, Penates is a Roman term. It is the household gods, the gods that keep the house well and intact. So these are now making their way to Italy. Throw your power into the winds and smash the ships, driving them under the water, or fling them everywhere and throw their bodies on the sea. Now, why should you do that? This is a very nice sentence. I have twice 7 nymphs of outstanding beauty. So this is a kind of circumlocution. Circumlocution, or a periphrasis, is a roundabout way of saying things. Instead of just saying, I have 14 nymphs. No, I have twice 7. The Latin is bis septem, twice 7. Now, why would anyone in their normal wits speak like that? Well, if you need to speak in hexameter, then there are certain requirements, and it is the meter, the Latin meter, that requires this word. Bis septem fits in well in the hexameter line. Quatuordecim, which is the Latin for 14, would not fit the meter. It would be crooked. The line would not be a perfect hexameter, and Vergil, of course, cannot have that, cannot allow that. So we have twice 7. It is a common technique with numbers in poetry that is bound by the rules of meter. And the English translation, of course, is not bound by these same rules, because this is not hexameter, but still keeping as much faith as possible to the original. The translator has chosen to translate literally. I have twice 7 nymphs of outstanding beauty, but the best in beauty is the lovely Deiopeia. I will join her to you in permanent wedlock. I will call her your own, so that she might pass years with you in repayment for your great service, and that she might make you a father with beautiful children. Now, Iolaus cannot resist such an offer, and he answers very concisely and very obediently. Iolaus answered her with these words: your task, my queen, is to seek out what you desire, mine to do what you command. So just lay down your orders and I will perform them. I owe you this kingdom, to you the scepter and Jove's goodwill. So according to Iolaus, another reason to obey Juno is not just the promise of this fair nymph, but also we understand that Juno intercedes on his behalf before Jupiter, before Jove. To you I owe this kingdom, to you the scepter and Jove's goodwill. You give me a place on the couch at the meals of the gods. You give me power over the clouds and the storms. So true, it is Jupiter, Jove, who finally set me in command of the winds, but it is through your intercession and goodwill. And therefore he obeys. Now, Aeneas' fleet is broken up. I did not include the actual description of the storm, but it is a horrendous storm of hurricane winds and gigantic waves that tower as high as mountains and completely, first of all, scatter the fleet. The ships lose sight of one another, and also destroys completely one of them. So one ship is totally destroyed, the men are killed, they are drowned, and the rest, though they survive, are scattered and do not know of their companions' survival. The wind and storm are so strong and potent that they push the ships to Carthage, the newly founded city, the city of Carthage. And they are, in fact, on the coast of Africa. Carthage at the tip of Africa, the northern tip of Africa. As I said, it is a fledgling city. It is not an ancient city. It is just being constructed. It is even under construction. Who rules that city? The Queen Dido, who is herself a refugee of fate. Dido originally comes from Sidon, okay, the Sidonian queen. Sidon, entire present-day Lebanon. She is of Phoenician descent. That is why the Carthaginians are also referred to sometimes as Phoenicians. That is why we call the famous wars of the 3rd century BC, the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, the 3 Punic wars. Why? Because Punic, poinus in Latin, is Phoenician, and Phoenician is synonymous with Carthaginian as far as we are concerned. So why did Dido have to flee her homeland? Well, there was intrigue there as well. Her malevolent brother was after the treasures of Dido's husband, Sychaeus, that's his name, and he killed him. Whereupon, to avoid any harm to herself, Dido and several others and her companions fled the city and sailed across the Mediterranean to Africa, where they started the foundation of a new city, Carthage. That, by the way, is the name or the meaning of Carthage, new city in Phoenician, new city. And it is there that the Trojans are stranded. Aeneas and his contingent on one part, and the rest on a different part of the shore. They each think that the others are lost, dead, and it is the other contingent, not that of Aeneas, that first encounters Dido and as suppliants seek hospitality. Now, you are already familiar with the importance of xenia and that sacred principle of hospitality, of receiving kindly under your protection any suppliant, any stranger, any foreigner that might appear at your doorstep and beg assistance of you. And it is then that Dido utters her famous line, "I myself have experienced miseries, and so now I show courtesy to wretches." That is, not being ignorant to misfortune, I now welcome the unfortunate, something of that sort. And it is then also that Aeneas shows up. In fact, he was there all the time, only he was veiled in a kind of divine mist. that would protect him. And it is then that Aeneas is revealed to Dido. And then Dido's misfortune begins. Why? Because Juno, again, still harboring, the storm was not enough. She still wants, as far as she is able to accomplish it, to impede Aeneas. And maybe, who knows, maybe even change the course of fate. Maybe that should happen as well. So she conspires with Venus that Aeneas should remain in Carthage. Now, how would that be accomplished? Very simply, by Carthage's queen, Dido, falling desperately, madly, threateningly even, I would say, in love with Aeneas. So the purpose of Juno is clear, but why should Venus agree to that? Because she knows Venus is his mother. She knows that her son Aeneas is destined to greatness, to be the father of a great nation. Well, it appears that she thinks that for the time being, it might be in Aeneas's interest to stay at Carthage safely. And in order to secure his safety, Venus agrees to that plan of Juno's, that Dido would fall in love with Aeneas. And, you know, in order to secure such affairs, whose assistance do we require? That of Eros, or as he is better known in Latin, Cupid. Venus's often unruly son. Now this, we said that Vergil in the composition of the Aeneid had many sources of inspiration. First and foremost was Homer and the Greek epic tradition. Secondly, there were the tragedians, the great Greek tragedians. And thirdly, which is inextricably linked with the first, with Homer, Apollonius of Rhodes, the Argonautica, and especially the affair of Jason and Medea. We will see in that little passage we will read from the Argonautica next week, we will see the direct effect that Apollonius of Rhodes had on Vergil. So, just as in the Argonautica, in order for Jason to succeed in his mission to capture the Golden Fleece, it is best that he should have some inside help. And to guarantee that, it is again Juno, but this time with Athena, who conspire to make Medea, the princess, fall desperately in love with Jason. And that is also accomplished with the help of Eros, that is the Roman Cupid. And so inspired by that scene, Vergil here imitates that course of events, and it is by the agreement of Venus and Juno that at a banquet that is held in honor of the exiles, Aeneas and his Trojan companions, it is at that banquet that Cupid takes on the image of Aeneas's son, Iulus. Now, Iulus is known by two names. He is either Iulus or Ascanius. It is the same person. So, Eros, Cupid, impersonates Iulus, Ascanius, and sits in Dido's lap. Now, we all know what Cupid is famous for, the lethal arrows of passion and love with which he pierces the hearts of mortals. And somehow it always ends badly for one side, especially for that is struck by the arrow. So it is, in fact, a god, a very cruel god that sits in Dido's lap and stealthily inserts into her heart the arrow of damned love that I will spoil the rest and say that leads to her suicide, to her death. And now it is with a sense of burning love that Dido listens to Aeneas. Aeneas at the banquet, and this is a parallel of Odysseus at the banquet of the Phaeacians. Aeneas starts recounting the fall of Troy. And this occupies the second and third books of the Aeneid. So he recounts the fall of Troy, and this, in fact, is the only major account that we have in ancient literature of the fall of Troy. As we said, it is not so elaborately mentioned in the Odyssey. The Odyssey does not tell of the fall of Troy. It, as it were, in passing terms, very briefly, very succinctly, reminds the machine, the lethal machine, the grievous machine that is the horse, the famous Trojan horse, that spewed forth warriors and brought about the destruction of Ilium. But it is not anything as elaborate, as detailed, as artistically styled as the description in Vergil. So this, in fact, is the famous account of the fall of Troy in great detail, both the entering of the Trojan horse into the city, the nightly foray of the Greeks into Troy, the burning of Troy, the savage killing of Trojan royalty, Priam, and those who remained of his sons, the uncontrollable slaughter of everything Trojan, and the escape of Aeneas. And then we will, of course, focus on the most famous incident of all, the Trojan horse. We will read it shortly. But then in book 3, Aeneas continues his description of the voyages, how he from burnt Troy made his way and sailed the dangerous Mediterranean Sea, all the adventures that he had on the way, until, of course, the storm that brought him to Carthage. This is the third book of the Aeneid. The fourth is devoted entirely to the fateful and destructive love of Dido, how she is willingly and unwillingly, because she is not aware that she is under the spell of the love god, but how she firmly believes that Aeneas is going to stay there. He is going to be her king and the king of Carthage, and that, mind you, after she vowed chastity in memory of her murdered husband Sychaeus. Her husband murdered by her brother. She loved him dearly, and she vowed never to remarry, never to give herself in any intimate relationship to another man. And her feeling, her emotion for Aeneas is so powerful. We know it is not only, perhaps there was some original spark there to begin with, but it was amplified 100-fold, even more, by the arrows of Cupid. So she cannot control herself, and she breaks her own vow of chastity, and in the special circumstances that were carefully brought about by Juno and Venus, Dido finds herself with Aeneas alone in a cave. There's a storm outside, and it is there that they unite, and there is some kind of marriage ceremony, some kind of matrimonial ceremony there. And as far as Dido is concerned, she believes that she is now wedded to Aeneas, although there was no real matrimonial ceremony there. It is just that she has given up her chastity in that cave, and it cannot be that Aeneas will leave her. Now, there are other kings in Africa. The other king is Iarbas, and Iarbas, who courted Dido in the past and was, of course, rejected by her, learns of her affiliation with Aeneas, and he prays to Jupiter, saying, "Who is this stranger that has come to our shores and has snatched Dido to himself? He is destined to found a different kingdom." It is then that Jupiter is roused to action, sending his messenger Mercury, that is the Roman name of Hermes, to remind Aeneas that while he was loitering there in Carthage, he was in fact neglecting his epochal task of founding the greatest nation the world had hitherto known. And so he must leave. And Aeneas, quite unheroically, I must say, decides to leave by stealth, in secret, to sneak out, perhaps, if he is lucky, unnoticed by Dido. He plans to desert her. She finds out, of course, before Aeneas manages to sail away, and she confronts him, of course, with great anger and frustration, and he has nothing more to say to her than, "This is my fate, this is my destiny, I must leave." This, of course, enrages Dido to such a degree that she decides to kill herself rather than live in the shame of knowing that she has broken her chastity, her vows of chastity to her dead former husband, her first husband, and she cannot contain the disappointment, the spurned love, as it were, her spurned love for Aeneas. And Aeneas, sad though he is, takes to the sea. He gathers his companions, and they sail away. And it is then that Dido commits horrendous suicide, not before she inflicts a curse on Aeneas and his offspring for generations to come. We will see that in a moment as well. And as Aeneas sails away, he looks back and sees on the coast of Carthage smoke billowing up into the sky. It is the smoke of the funeral pyre, that is the fire that burns Dido. Dido did not burn herself. She committed suicide by stabbing herself with a sword on top of all the Trojan treasures that were left in Carthage, and these were then burned as a funeral pyre in honor of Dido. She was burned by the Trojans and by her sister, Anna. Well, Aeneas continues on his voyage. The fifth book is devoted to funeral games in honor of Aeneas's father Anchises, who, by the way, did not survive the voyage. Even before the storm that brought the Trojans to Carthage, Anchises died, and he was buried in Sicily. It is there that the Trojans return. They celebrate Anchises' funeral with funeral games. And this, of course, is in imitation of the 23rd book of the Iliad, where we read of, or rather listen to, the funeral games in honor of the dead Patroclus. Thence they sail to Italy, finally Italy, but not yet the site of future Rome or the final destination. No, they stop at Cumae in Latin, where famously Aeneas encounters the prophetess of Apollo, the Sibyl, and she promises to help him to be his guide in the underworld, because there would not be a genuine Homeric or Vergilian hero without a catabasis. Remember that term? We mentioned it last week. A catabasis is a going under, a going down where? To the underworld, to the realm of Dis. Now, Dis is the Roman name. Dis. I'm sorry for this. This is ineffaceable. You cannot erase it. This is the Roman name for Hades. And there is a very beautiful line there that says, Noctes atque dies patet atri janua ditis. The door of black Dis lies open day and night. It is easy to go down, but the great task is to try and go out. It is easy to go down to the house of death, but you cannot return from there. Of course, if you're an epic hero like Aeneas or Odysseus, then of course, given the right aid, you can accomplish that also. And it is there, the famous sixth book of the Aeneid, where Aeneas experiences a kind of, well, not he himself, but he sees all kinds of mystical transfigurations. He sees the souls of people long dead, drinking from the river of forgetfulness, only to be reincarnated and to be given a second, third, or more existence on earth, a kind of Pythagorean perception of reincarnation. He also sees the great heroes yet to be born in Roman history. We mentioned the great deliverer, Quintus Fabius Maximus Cunctator, the delayer, who saved the Roman people from being utterly destroyed by Hannibal. Hannibal, by the way, a descendant, so it is believed, of Dido. We will see that in a moment. And other heroes, and it is there that we encounter one of the most memorable lines. There are many memorable lines in the Aeneid. Vergil was fully trained in the art of oratory. He knew how to create memorable lines, and there's at the very end of Aeneas's sojourn in the underworld, it is both the Sibyl, by the way, who serves as his guide, and the spirit of his father Anchises, So much as Odysseus sees the ghost of his dead mother Anticlea in Hades, so does Aeneas see the spirit of his dead father Anchises in Hades. He also, by the way, even before that, sees the spirit of Dido reunited finally in the underworld with the spirit of her murdered husband Sychaeus. And Dido sees Aeneas, and even then, in death, refuses to speak to him, still harboring that wound of spurned love. And so Anchises continues to guide Aeneas in the underworld, and it is there that he tells him, I will skip to the end, those memorable lines. Just a second. The memorable lines of Anchises that, as it were, encapsulate the destiny of the Roman people. He tells him, others, I think this, will forge the bronze breathing more naturally than us and bring out the living face from the marble. He is, of course, referring to the Greeks. The Greeks will excel in art. They will make the bronze breathe more naturally than us and bring out the living face from the marble. Many of the statues that we have of Rome are, in fact, only copies of lost Greek originals. It is the Greeks who have this fame. Not only that, and plead their causes with more eloquence. Again, the art of oratory, the knowledge of how to speak well, the art of language. Not that the Romans lacked anything in that field, but the Greeks surpassed them. And it is, as it were, preordained here in the prophecy of Anchises, and describe the movement of the heavens with a staff etching on the sand. Famously, the Greek astronomers would make their calculations, and they would describe the constellations by etching figures on the sand. And will tell of the rising of the stars. But you remember to rule the nations with your power, O Roman. Tu regerim perio populos Romane memento. This will be your art. Haiti berunt artes, pacique imponere morem. That is, to impose a civilization on peace. The Romans will pacify the world, of course, pacify the world after they had conquered it. There is even the late historian Tacitus has a cynical line saying, ubi pacem faciunt, well, it escapes me. Where they lay waste, they call it peace. Well, anyway, it is a peace that is the result of war. So this will be your art, to impose civilization on peace, to be sparing to the conquered, parcere subiectis et debellare superbos, and to fight down the proud. This is the fate of Rome, to be sparing to the conquered. But if you should rise in mutiny and rebel, well, then it is the destiny of the Romans to fight you down, to fight down the proud. Yes. Good. So, and then Aeneas emerges from the underworld and continues his journey. Finally, they make landfall at the mouth of the Tiber River. Italy, at last, the destined place where they can disembark and never take to the sea again. This happens at the beginning of the 7th book, the Iliadic part, as it were, of the beginning of the Iliadic part of the Aeneid. Now, I will not go into that part in any great detail. I will just give you the barest of bare outlines, because it is rather complicated. It is concerned with the intricacies of war and how Aeneas comes to fight the local tribes of Italy, most notably the Rutulians, led by Turnus. So Turnus, in fact, in Italy, Turnus is the greatest of Aeneas's foes, mortal foes in Italy. It is as though we had in Homer, we had Achilles versus Hector. So here we have Aeneas versus Turnus. And Aeneas reaches a city called Laurentum, ruled by King Latinus, king of the Latini, and father to Lavinia, who, as fate would have it, is engaged to Turnus. But upon the arrival of Aeneas, King Latinus recalls an ancient prophecy that his daughter should wed a foreigner. Thereupon he breaks the promise of wedlock to Turnus and announces that now his daughter Lavinia will marry Aeneas. Well, his wife does not approve of it, nor does Turnus, who is enraged, and there are other affairs that cause the outbreak of war between the newly arrived Trojans and the Rutulians. Again, we will not go into the incidents and battles that are fought, but we will say that the matter is finally decided in a duel. Again, I'm doing here gross injustice to the Iliadic part of the Aeneid, and I therefore urge you to read it for yourselves. It is a great story of adventure and battle and loyalty and heroism and divine miracles, all things that make a story great. But I am so diluting it that I have already reached the end and told you that it all comes down to a duel, a decisive duel between Aeneas and Turnus, just as we had the duel between Achilles and Hector. It is no secret who wins. Of course, it is Aeneas, and just as he is about to spare the fallen, wounded Turnus, he sees on his body a belt that Turnus had formerly taken as spoil from a young prince called Pallas, who was very friendly to Aeneas, and this causes Aeneas, in a fit of rage and implacable anger, to there and then kill Turnus. And the Aeneid ends with a description of Turnus's soul fleeing his body and going down into the underworld. Just as we had seen previously in the death of Hector, only that the Iliad did not end with Hector being slain by Achilles, rather it ended with the burial of Hector after Achilles and Priam had reconciled. Great. Now, so this sums up the, again, in very, very general outline, the story of the Aeneid, and we will now go back to examine in just greater detail the famous scenes of first the Trojan Horse, and then the suicide of Dido. So, let us see. The Trojan Horse. Just a second. The Trojan Horse is famous first and foremost for the incidents with Laocoon and the lies of Simon. So the Greeks, following the ruse of Odysseus, that is the deceit, the trickery of Odysseus, have built this gigantic, huge wooden horse and left it on the shores of Troy and sailed to the island of Tenedos, where the entire Grecian fleet lies hidden. And so the Trojans open their gates, they come out to the shore, and they see this marvelous invention. And it is then that Laocoon, indignant, standing out before all, came running down from the citadel, accompanied by a great crowd. And from far off he cried out, this is the famous speech of Laocoon, "Wretched citizens, what is this madness? Do you believe the enemy has sailed away? Or do you think that the Danaans' gift lacks in treachery?" These are all rhetorical questions. Don't you know Ulysses? Now, Ulysses, that is Odysseus, is by far the most detested of Greek heroes in the eyes of the Trojans. He is negatively and derisively mentioned in the Aeneid whenever possible. And so here, don't you know Ulysses? Either the Achaeans hide concealed in the horse, which is exactly the case, or this machine is built to use against our walls, or spy on our homes, or fall on the city from above, or it conceals some trick. Okay, so it is, and now the famous line, "Don't trust the horse, Teucrians, equo ne credite teucri." Teucrians is a synonym to Trojans, because one of their ancestors was Teucer, so they are called Teucrians. "Whatever it is, I fear the Danaans, even bearing gifts, quid quidides, timeo danaos, et dona ferentis." Okay, I fear the Danaans, even bearing gifts. So speaking, he whirled with immense power a huge spear into the belly of the beast. With its rounded seams, it stood there, trembling, and the hollow caverns of the vibrating womb gave out a long groan. And if the fate of the gods had not been ill-disposed, if our own minds were not so deluded, he would have driven us to slaughter the Greeks hidden in the horse. And now the pitiful, it is called anastrophe. That is the addressing in second person. O Troy, you, O Troy, would still be standing, or unfulfilled, unreal conditions. And you, O high citadel of Priam, would yet remain. So it is at that very instant that they detect a Greek soldier by the name of Sinon that was purposely that was on purpose left there on the shore to, as it were, convince, persuade, deceive the Trojans into accepting the Trojan horse as a gift that should be brought into the city to appease the goddess Athena and to ensure Trojan supremacy. Now, he then spins a web of lies that is really, really a masterpiece of deception, saying, again, it is this Sinon who speaks ill of Ulysses, saying that because of Ulysses, because of Odysseus, he was stranded there. It is then that he explains to Priam, to King Priam, that the horse, in fact, is a gift to appease the goddess Athena, Minerva, and that it should be taken into the city because it would secure, as I said, Trojan existence, Trojan supremacy, and would even allow them, the Trojans, to sail to Greece and conquer Greece itself. So let's go further and see. Where is it? Just a second. Over here. Here. For if your hands did violence to the gifts of Minerva, then great destruction, may the gods first turn that omen against themselves, would be sure to come to the rule of Priam and the Trojans. But if the horse were to go up to the city, dragged by your hands, then Asia would come in mighty war to the walls of Pelops. Now, Asia, in fact, is another name for Troy, because Troy is in Asia Minor. So therefore, and you know also from our reading in Herodotus that Troy was taken as a symbol of the East and therefore of Asia. Okay, so then Asia would come in mighty war to the walls of Pelops. Now, Pelops, what are the walls of Pelops? It is a reference to the Peloponnesus, that great peninsula of Greece, which here stands for Hellas as a whole, for Greece as a whole. So Troy would in fact come in mighty war to the walls of Greece, and the same fate would be in store for our children. Through such deception and the skill of the lying Sinon, we believed it all. We were taken in by his deceits and his pretended tears. Though we were not conquered by Tydeus' son Diomedes, nor by Achilles from Larissa, nor by 10 years of war, nor by 1,000 ships. So all these proved useless in conquering Troy. All that was required was deceit and the lies of Sinon. And then, as if to enforce and give further strength to his lies, because you know that it was fated by the gods that Troy should fall, comes the horrendous and infamous death of Laocoon and his sons. I would be horribly remiss if I didn't show you at this point the famous statue of Laocoon and his sons being smothered and strangled by, well, broken serpents here, because the statue is incomplete. But this again is a Roman copy of a Hellenistic original. And this, of course, is Laocoon trying in vain to free himself from the coils of the poisonous sea serpents, which had moments earlier devoured his two helpless sons. So you can see it, of course, in the Vatican Museum, and it is always a wonder to behold. Good. And no less of a wonder is the text which inspired this physical creation of art. And at this point, something greater, much the more tremendous, happens to us wretches and shakes our unsuspecting hearts. Laocoon, chosen by lot as our priest of Neptune, was sacrificing an immense bull at our sacred altar. But look, two serpents with gigantic coils slither over the tranquil sea from Tenedos. Now, it is Tenedos where the Greek fleet lies hidden. So the destruction of Laocoon, as it were, is symbolic and presages, as it were, predicts the fall of Troy. So the serpents hail from Tenedos. I shudder to tell it. Side by side they head for the shore. Their breasts are raised high over the water. Their blood-red crests wind over the waves. The rest of their body sails through the sea behind them as their huge backs are arched in folds. A roar comes from the foaming sea, and now they are ashore, their burning eyes filled with blood and fire. They lick their hissing jaws with flickering tongues. Terrified, we fled at the sight. They go straight for Laocoon. At first, each serpent enwraps the slender bodies of his two sons, and they feed on their wretched limbs. Then they seize Laocoon himself, who runs to help them, brandishing his weapons. They wreathe him in their massive coils. Twice they wrap around his waist. Twice they wind their scaly backs around his throat. Their heads and high necks tower over him. Laocoon tries to loosen the knots with his hands, his headband soaked in blood and black poison. At the same time, he raises a horrific shout to the stars, like a bellowing bull who flees wounded from the altar, shaking the ill-aimed axe from his neck. So again, at this pathetic climax, following good epic tradition, we saw this in the blinding of Polyphemus. Right at the height of the event, the author, the poet, inserts a simile. That is, he likens the event to something else. So here, the instance of Laocoon being devoured by the serpents is compared to a sacrificial victim to an to a bull who is about to be sacrificed, and before it is slaughtered, it was struck with an axe, but the axe was ill-aimed and therefore failed to kill the bull immediately. And so the bull, wounded, flees from the altar, shaking the ill-aimed axe from his neck. Really a terrible scene. So just as the bull was finally, we assume, unsuccessful to avoid his miserable fate, so was Laocoon destined to be devoured by the serpents. What greater omen could there have been to persuade the Trojans to take in the horse? Well, once they had devoured him, the pair of serpents slips away toward the highest shrines. They seek out the citadel of ferocious Tritonia. Tritonia is a synonym of Minerva. There they hide under the feet of the goddess and the round circle of her shield. So it is a token indeed that the horse, the machine sacred to Minerva, is really to be hauled, is destined to be hauled into the city, because we see here the serpents having devoured Laocoon, who, I remind you, desecrated the horse just a few moments before by hurling his javelin into its womb. He was now devoured, and the serpents go to the temple of the goddess Minerva. Well, the message is clear. Pull the statue to her house, offer prayers to the goddess's power. And the horse enters the city, and up it goes. The horse slips threateningly into the middle of the city. And then, oh my country, oh Ilium, house of the gods, and you, the walls of the Dardanians, famous in war. 4 times it stuck on the threshold of the gate, and 4 times the arms rattled in its belly. So it is as if fate is trying to prevent the horse from entering Troy and from spewing forth, as it were, the content of its belly, the Greek soldiers who will burn Troy. 4 times it is stuck on the threshold. Nonetheless, we pressed on, blind with madness, and we set up the calamitous monster atop our sacred citadel. So a calamitous monster, a monster that will bring about calamity, that is disaster and destruction. And of course, who but Cassandra would foretell the disastrous, imminent future? Cassandra opens her lips and reveals what is fated to come, but her words are never to be believed by order of the god. So Cassandra, daughter of Priam, was wooed by Apollo. She, of course, rejected him, and you cannot reject a god without being punished. So Phoebus gave her the doubtful gift of prophecy. All her prophecies were correct and precise, alas, to be believed by none. And so she prophesies the destruction of Troy, but no one believes her, and we all know what happened next. We wretches for whom that day was to be the last. That day was to be the last. We wrapped the shrines of the gods with festive fronds throughout the city. And then night settles down on the city. They fall asleep. The horse's belly is opened by that very same deceitful Sinon. The Greek soldiers, Odysseus, Ulysses among them, of course, slither down. They open the gates of Troy, and Troy is then laid waste by the Greek army that all the while was making its way back to the shores of Troy from Tenedos. And this, of course, is recounted by Aeneas in a banquet to Dido, just as Odysseus had recounted his own adventures to King Alcinous in the banquet of the Phaeacians. And now we will move to the fourth book, in which Dido realizes that Aeneas will not remain, and in fact, that he is already leaving. And so we were making this leap to the fourth book of the Aeneid. The third book, as I have just told you, is a continuation of the story of Aeneas in first person to Dido and the Trojans in the banquet of his adventures and voyages, until he reaches the stage where the storm had blown them to the shores of Africa. They fall in love, Dido more so. Aeneas is leaving, and now dawn, leaving the saffron bed of Tithonus, sprinkled the earth with the first light. This is an imitation of the formulaic line in Homer. Now rose red dawn with her rosy red fingers shone once more. So Vergil makes this more elaborate. You will notice, however, that there are no repetitions in Vergil, at least not anything that approaches the number of repetitions and formulaic patterns that we have in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Why? Because the Iliad and the Odyssey belong to the oral tradition, and the formulas, the repeated lines were part and parcel of the art of the singer. Here, Vergil composes in writing. The Aeneid was conceived and put down on papyrus from its very beginning, although, as all ancient works, prose, not to mention poetry, they were all meant to be read out loud. But still, this is literature that is committed to writing, and there is no need for the mechanism, for the technique of repetition. It would be strange. But still, there are reminiscences of the formulaic lines of Homer. When from her tower the queen saw the day first whiten, and the fleet sailing away under full sail, and she saw that there were no oarsmen on the shore or in the harbor. 3 and then 4 times she struck her lovely breast with her hand. So again, the 3 and 4 times, this is a kind of, I wouldn't say formula, but it is used by the poets to usually emphasize something done in vain. 3 times I tried to embrace the fleeing shadow of Eurydice, and it fled nonetheless. And here, Dido expresses her frustration and ends it with a curse. Ah, Jupiter, will he leave then? Will this stranger mock our realm? Shall my Tyrians take up arms and follow them out of the city? And others drag our ships from the docks? Go, bring fire, quick, spread the sails, drive the oars. She, in her frustration, offers to pursue the Trojans. But then, what am I saying? Where am I? What insanity changes my mind? Unhappy Dido, now your impious acts touch you. So she sees this as a kind of retribution, a kind of punishment inflicted on her because she had violated her vows of chastity to the memory of her murdered husband, Sychaeus. The right time was then when you gave him the scepter. Behold the faith and trust of a man who, they say, carries with him the penates of his father, of a man who, they say, carried around on his shoulders his father, worn out with age. Could I not have seized him and ripped him apart and scattered the parts on the waves? So she's being cynical here, saying, is this the pious Aeneas? We've spoken of Aeneas's piety and how that is his key quality, his dutifulness, his sense of duty towards father, towards family, gods, and mission. Well, she then continues, if it is necessary that that man whose name I cannot speak touch port and sail to the land, and so the fate of Jove demands, well, that boundary stands fixed, but let him beg for help, harassed by war, and the arms of a bold people, banished from his territories, torn from the embrace of Iülus. So this is part of her curse, and this is going to come true very soon, because he will reach his destination, but he will encounter a war there. Again, this is reminiscent of the curse of Polyphemus, when he learns that Odysseus, that it is Odysseus who blinded him, and he prays to Polyphemus, to Poseidon, his father, saying that, well, even if Odysseus is destined to reach Ithaca, his home, let him find a home in tatters, ruined. Let him find on the way obstacles. Let him come alone without his companions. So this is a kind of echo of Polyphemus's prayer and curse of Odysseus. So she then continues, and may he see the shameful death of his people. I pray for this, and I pour out my last word with blood, because she, following this curse, she's going to kill herself. Then you, my Tyrians, here, you, my Tyrians, Tyrians are men of Tyre and Sidon, the Phoenicians, who are now the Carthaginians, hound with hatred all the offspring of the race that is to come. So she, as it were, she commands future Carthaginians to hound with hatred all the offspring of the race that is to come, that is the race of Aeneas. Offer this as a tribute to my ashes. Let there be no love among our peoples. So what started out as the greatest infatuation of them all ends with a curse, let there be no love among our peoples. This is an etiological story. It is there to give a primordial reason, an ancient reason for the implacable hatred between Carthage and Rome, because the memory of the Punic Wars, the wars with Carthage, was so violently etched on the collective memory of the Romans. It was one of the bloodiest affairs in Roman history, that Vergil sees it to his purpose to found it on a mythological ground. Therefore, let there be no love among our peoples. May no treaties come into being. And now, what is taken to be a prophecy of the birth of Hannibal. He is not named, but it is a clear allusion. Arise some unknown avenger from my bones, who will pursue the Dardanian colonists with fire and sword. Now or in the future, at whatever time that his strength shall be given him. I pray that shore be opposed to shore, because Carthage lies right across from Italy. There's a huge gap of sea between them, but waves to water, arms to arms, all opposed, let them fight, themselves and their descendants. So this is the prophetic curse of Dido. Well, in retrospect, we know that it came true. Good. Now, next week, we will continue with the death of Dido. We have to read that. And this will serve as a link to our discussion of the very short passage from the Argonautica. Well, in fact, this is what awaits us. Great. Now, let each of us go out and contend with the fretful elements. Good. So I will see you all next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.